Okay, so I'm going to start to share my screen and I'll get Christina's video queued up, and then again, she'll be back with us for the Q&A portion of things. If you give me one quick second, I'm gonna get that set up for you, okay?
Hi, my name is Christina and I'm the Community Food Animator here at York Region Food Network, and I'm in the kitchen today and we're going to be talking all about apples. So it's December, but apples are still in season because they're being stored for the winter, so we can still continue to use them throughout the next couple of months, even though we associate them with fall typically because, you know, with the fall leaves and trees and going to the farm to pick apples. But yeah, we are so lucky to have locally grown apples here in York Region that we can get so many different varieties with so many different tastes and flavors. And today we're going to be talking specifically about how to use the apple from the peel to the core. So we are familiar with nose to tail cooking, but we're going to apply that to the apple, and we're going to try to use everything to reduce our waste and just be creative and think of other ways we can use apples other than, you know, making our traditional pies and crisp. So yeah, we're going to be today making a caramelized apple upside down cake, and we're also going to be using apple peels to make apple crisps. So it's kind of going to be dehydrated in the oven and tossed with cinnamon and sugar, and it's going to be really tasty. And then we're going to do something more experimental. We're going to try to make a mulled apple cider. So we're going to get started. All right, so we're going to be starting with our caramelized apple upside down cake. That's quite a mouthful to say. So we have two components that we're going to work with. We have our caramel sauce that's going to be at the base of our cake, and then we're going to have the cake that's going to go on top of the caramel and the apples. So let's get started to make the caramel first. Here in a small bowl I have some brown sugar and some cinnamon, and you'll get an email of all the ingredients and the recipe and the steps if you'd like to follow along. So I'm going to melt some butter. So I have my melted butter that I popped into the microwave for about a minute, and I'm just going to combine it with my brown sugar and cinnamon here. And then this is going to be the base of our sauce. So I'm just going to pour that in and then get this well mixed together, and then it's as simple as that. And then in the oven it'll get really nice and gooey and sticky and delicious. So I'm going to take this butter here and I'm going to use a paper towel. So this is all in the name of not wasting, right? So I'm going to actually have some melted butter left in my bowl, and I'm just going to use that to grease the bottom of my pan here. So I get all that butter out. And hopefully this isn't going to stick. That's going to be the true test at the end of this. Okay, so I'm going to pour in my caramel sauce here. And then I'm going to peel and chop my apples, or slice my apples, I mean, and I'm going to spread it onto the bottom. And then this is where, like, if you feel artistic, you can kind of lay them however you want. All right, so that is my bottom of the cake pan. All right, I'm going to get to peeling my apples now. And then don't forget, we're going to save these apple peels to make our apple peel snack. And if you are thinking of preparing the snack ahead of time, you may want to peel the apples so that you have nice long peels. I'm struggling a little bit here to do that, but it'll be okay. So the apple that I'm using today, I believe these are Ida Reds, and I got them from a farm here in the York Region that's still open actually. They're from Pine Farm Orchards, which is not too far from where we are here in Aurora. And they have quite a few varieties of apples that are really, really tasty. So the reason why I chose these Cider Reds is because they're tart, and I think that will go well with balancing out the sugar, and they are quite firm when they're baked. So I like that because then it'll kind of give you more texture when you're eating it, and it kind of keeps its shape. So if you're making something like apple pies, this would be a really great apple to use, but also really great eaten fresh as well. Other apples you can consider using are Galas or Macintosh. Galas are on the sweeter side, so if you want, you can actually use a combination of apples, so you get that sweet and tart flavor. Macintoshes are great because they retain their shape well and they're tart as well. Everyone's favorite Honeycrisp goes really well in apple desserts too. Yeah, so lots of apples to consider, and if you're not too familiar with all the different varieties, you can definitely experiment and host a little taste test for apples. Okay, so I have all my peels off. Now I'm just gonna cut the core out and save that as well. So I guess the reason why we tend to cut out the core is just so because, sorry, not the core, the peels, is just, as I mentioned, it gets a little tough when you're eating it. You don't get this nice consistent texture, but sometimes it works well in different recipes. You just gotta experiment. All right, so all of my cores have been removed, and now I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slice them. So I'm gonna slice them a few centimeters thick. So I don't know if you can see, but this is what my slices look like. Just because I have 2 apples, I think that's quite a lot. So, and we want a nice apple, firm apple texture when we're biting into it, since the only part of the cake we're getting apple is the top. Okay, so now I have all of my apple slices cut here. I'm going to add it to the caramel that's in my cake pan. So I'm just going to add the slices in like in a fanning style, just so it's nice and pretty the way I like it. And if any of the slices you're finding are too thick, you can always slice them thinner. All right, so there is the base of my apple cake. I have some of these left. I'm just gonna put them aside and I'll snack on them later. But let's move on to making the cake itself. So for the cake, we have some butter at room temperature, and then in that butter, the butter is going to go into a stand mixer here, and then I'm going to cream that with some sugar here. And the goal of creaming it is to make it nice and light and fluffy, so that it'll give the cake some lift. You do get lift from other ingredients such as the baking soda, but creaming it a bit helps it to make the cake light and fluffy as well. So I'm going to add some butter, and I have my sugar here. So I'm just gonna put that in. And we're gonna let it go for about 5 minutes. And I'm gonna scrape down the sides in between, just so all the butter gets evenly incorporated. So first I'm gonna start at a low speed, and then I'm gonna gradually increase speed as the butter and the sugar combine. Our butter is creamed now, and I'm gonna combine the dry ingredients together. So in this bowl I have some all-purpose flour, and I'm gonna add in some salt. It's kind of odd sometimes to add salt, or we think it's odd to add salt in baked goods because, you know, it's salty, but it does help to balance out the sweetness, so it's a crucial ingredient to have. So we're gonna need 1/4 teaspoon of salt, And then I have some cinnamon here. Lots of cinnamon because, you know, we're baking with apples. You can't not have cinnamon. We're gonna add half a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Nope, sorry, baking powder. Don't want to get those two confused. And that's pretty much it for our dry ingredients. We're gonna whisk this together so that all the ingredients are well combined. And then I'm going to add in eggs to my butter. So we have 2 eggs here. And after each egg, I'm gonna mix to incorporate. All right, so adding in our second egg. And then mixing it to combine. All right, that's the second egg. So if you can see the way our mixture looks right now, it kind of looks a bit curdled. And that's because our eggs and butter are at different temperatures, and that usually tends to happen when there's a difference in temperature in your ingredients. So that's why you usually see recipes call for room temperature ingredients, but it's okay. There's nothing wrong with our cake. It just looks a little funny for now. So now we have most of our wet ingredients are in the mixer here. The next thing I'm going to do, before I do that actually, I'm going to scrape down the bowl. And this is a really important step. Don't forget to do this because sometimes there's, you know, butter that's still on the bottom or sides of the mixer that don't really get fully incorporated. So yeah, I'm going to scrape down my bowl, and then we're going to add in our milk and flour in alternating steps, and this is just so that we don't overmix. So I'm actually using soured milk here. The recipe called for buttermilk, but I don't find that I use buttermilk very often, so using vinegar and milk together kind of creates that similar buttermilk profile. And what it is basically 1 tablespoon of vinegar to a cup of milk, but I'd reduce that here, so I only have half a cup of milk and half a tablespoon of vinegar. And you don't always have to use vinegar. You can use something sour, anything sour that you have in hand, like lemon juice or apple cider vinegar. Okay, so we're gonna start with our dry ingredients first. I'm just gonna mix in about 1/3. And we always wanna start and end with our dry ingredients. So I put in some of my flour, and when it's mostly incorporated, I'm gonna stop the mixer so I don't overmix, and I'm just gonna scrape the rest of the flour so it goes in. Alright, and then to this mixture, I'm going to add in half of my soured milk. And you can see as the milk and vinegar sat kind of curdled, and that's what you want to see. Alright, adding in another 1/3 of my dry ingredients. Adding in the remaining half of my milk. And then lastly, the remaining flour mixture. Okay, so I see most of my ingredients are incorporated, but I'm just going to do the rest of it by hand so I don't overmix. Oh, and I also want to mention that you don't necessarily need to have a stand mixer to make this ingredient. You can cream butter and sugar together with your hands. It'll just take a little bit of effort and some muscle power, but you can get it done. So just making sure that get all the rest of the flour bits. We don't want any dry spots or to miss any of the flour. Okay, so it's looking pretty great. It looks like batter and it smells really good too. So this is what it looks like. And we're just going to plop this on top of our apples. My oven is preheating right now at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And once it's preheated, I'm going to pop this in and we're going to check on it in about 20 minutes. Alright, so I'm going to even out the batter. And my apples are pretty solid at the bottom there, so I don't think they're going to move. So I can be kind of a little rougher with this. And I think that looks pretty good. This is going to go in our 350 degree oven that's been preheated, and we're going to check on it in 20 minutes. All right, our cake has just come out of the oven, and I'm going to test it to see if the middle is done. And we're going to just see if there's any crumbs left, and there's not any crumbs, which means that's fully cooked. So it was in the oven for 20 minutes, but I would say that our oven runs a bit hot. You could check it at about 30 to 40 minutes. So we're going to let it cool for a bit. We don't want the sugar caramel mixture to be too hot. We don't want to burn ourselves. And then we're going to come back and we're going to flip it to see if it worked. Okay, so I am back and we're going to try to unveil it after letting it cool for about 5 minutes. So on my plate here, that I'm going to invert it on. All right, so I'm going to flip, and then I'm going to get it to make sure that if it's stuck, it'll come out. And let's see. Oh, I feel it. There it is! It's our cake! Look how beautiful that is! So it came out perfectly, it didn't stick at all, and our design is intact, so it looks amazing! So our next recipe is going to be our apple peel chips, and it's really quite simple. So we have our bowl of apple peels here that I have collected from several different apples, and then we have some melted butter, and this is just to help the mixture stick together. I'm just going to pour that on top and then kind of stick my apples in here so that I get all the butter out. And then I have some cinnamon and white sugar in here as well, and that's just to help sweeten it up and give it a little flavor from the cinnamon. So I'm just going to toss it in here, and if you prefer not to use butter, you can use water to help the sugar and cinnamon mixture stick to the peels. But that's really all there is to it. So I have a sheet pan here that's lined with parchment paper, and my oven is preheated at 400 degrees. Rather than going low and slow, we're going to go high and fast. And if you prefer to stick it in your dehydrator, if you have one, you can also do that as well. But I figured that while our oven is on, we can just blast them for a bit and cook them quickly. That'll also help you conserve some energy as well, if that's something you're thinking about. So yeah, I'm just going to lay these out here. Some of these are quite long, so I'm going to break them apart. And we don't really want them too close to each other, so it'll give them a chance to brown. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm going to stick them in the oven and pull them out to show you what they look like. So I've pulled out the apple peels from the oven, and I put them in this bowl here, and we've actually been snacking on them because they're quite delicious. But they only took about 7 minutes in our oven. Again, our oven runs quite hot, so just keep an eye out for them because we don't want them to burn. I did get a little bit more color on them than I would like, but they're still really, really tasty. It's a really simple and quick recipe if you have apple peels left over from another recipe that you want to use them up and not let them go to waste. And I highly recommend you try them. So it's been a few days. In the meantime, I've been collecting my apple peels and cores. And what I did was I put them in a Ziploc bag and put them in the freezer so they don't go off. If you're making a lot of apple pies for some reason and you have a lot of cores and peels at once, you can make this right away. But if you want to collect them over time, you can put them in a bag in a freezer and they'll keep pretty well. So I think I've accumulated a fair amount of cores and peels here, so I think it's ready to make my apple cider. I just put it in a pot, and they are frozen, but that's okay. They're going to get cooked anyway. So I'm just going to fill the pot with as much water to cover the apples. And really just eyeballing this here because it's a pretty simple and forgiving recipe. So we don't want to add too much water because we don't want to dilute the flavor of the apples. Since you're only using the peels and the cores and there's just not much apple, you do lose some flavor, which is why you do want to have as much apple peel and core as possible. So I'm going to start this, and it's basically just gonna simmer for 30 or so minutes, maybe longer depending on how it tastes. Actually, before I get to that, I'm going to talk about the spices that I'm using. So this recipe is actually going to be a mulled apple cider, which means we're going to add in some of our mulling spices. Here I have a cinnamon stick, I have some brown sugar, and that's optional if you want to add some sweetness. I think it'll be nice because my apples are quite tart and it'll bring out the sweetness of the apples. I have some cardamom and some nutmeg and some cloves. I think really you can use any spices that you have. You can use black pepper or allspice or even ginger. Anything warming that will bring out the the flavors of the apple and complement it well. Ooh, so we're going to add these into our pot here. And you can also add in some lemon peel or orange peel. That'd be really nice to bring out, some acidity as well, just so you get that balance of sweet and sour and warmth. But I'm not going to use that today, and I'm sure it'll be fine. Or great even. Okay, so I'm just mixing it up to evenly distribute the spices and kind of to break up the sugar. And then now all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my stove here, and I'm going to let it come to a boil, and then afterwards let it steep or simmer for about 30 to 40 minutes, and I'm going to taste it to see if I like how it tastes at that point. I'm going to see if there's enough apple flavor. If not, then I'm just going to continue it for a bit longer. So the longer that you boil this for, the more concentrated your flavor is going to be. But also keep in mind that you'll lose some of the liquid just because, as it's concentrating, then you're just going to have less liquid. So this is what I mean by this recipe is kind of flexible. It's totally to your taste. So we'll come back in about 30 to 40 minutes to see how our mulled apple cider is doing. It's been about 45 minutes and I've stopped my mixture. It was simmering, for about 35 minutes. It took a while for it to come to a boil, but now it's changed color and it's kind of thicker. It's almost syrupy. Like you can kind of tell that there's more body to the apple cider. And the liquid has reduced to about half. I've been tasting along the way just to see where it's at and when I should stop it. So I think I'm happy with where it's at now. And so now I have a fine mesh sieve and a container that I'm going to strain my cider through. And you're going to see that I'm not going to have too much liquid because I did cook it for quite a while. But I think, I'll get a good glass or two out of this. And so the fine mesh sieve is here to catch all of my apple pieces. But also what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the flesh and skin so that I can extract every last bit of apple, because that's where all the flavor is. And we already worked this hard for it. We don't want to miss out on the last step. So I'm just pushing here, and it smells really, really nice. The apple has gotten a lot softer, and I'm just going to extract as much flavor as I can. And it's cool because the liquid actually looks like apple cider because it's kind of has that cloudiness to it. If you want to go even further, you can push the mixture through a coffee filter and that would extract all the fibers. But I kind of like that, so I'm going to leave it. All right, so I think I've gotten as much as I can out of my remaining apple bits. And what I can do now with this is I can put it in the compost because I've used as much as I can. And yeah, I'll give you a final look of my product. So this is what I'm left with. Not bad. So I'm just going to pour myself a glass. And I'm going to fish out my cinnamon stick that I was mulling it with. Just stick it in there. And look, mulled apple core or apple scrap cider. Wow, that's so warming, especially on a day like today. And it's like snowing outside, it's really cold. This is so not spicy, but just full of spices. So there you have it. That's 3 different ways that you can use the apple from peel to core. There's so many more ways that you can use apples, and we've included other ideas on a worksheet, which you can access on our website. You can make stuff like apple cider vinegar. So it's not apple cider that you can drink, but stuff that you would use for, cleaning or for salads. So if you're into fermenting, or if you'd be interested in learning how to ferment, apple cider or apple core, you can turn scraps into something that you can use in your house. There's also apple scrap jelly, which you can make. So apple has a lot of pectin naturally, and you can combine that with sugar and it solidifies into a jelly that you can eat. You can also make apple scrap syrup. So similar to maple syrup, but not exactly. You can use your apple scraps to turn it into, a syrup that you can use to sweeten things. You'll find all that on that worksheet or information sheet. So I hope you enjoyed learning about the different ways you can use apples today. If you have any other ways that you like to use apples or use up the whole apple, please let me know. I'd love to see what else you can make with apple scraps. It's such a fun way to reduce our waste and get creative and think of other ways that we can, turn something that's considered trash or compost into a whole new thing. So thanks for watching. Bye.
Okay, so we do have Christina on with us to answer any questions. I'm kind of jealous because I was at the office to try that apple cake and then also the apple chips. They were fantastic, but I wasn't around for the apple cider. So I am very excited to try that recipe and try that out at home for sure. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. While you guys are thinking, I actually have some questions for you, Christina. So I know one thing like I've always heard from people is apple seeds are poisonous, or there's just something about don't eat the apple seeds. So what do you think about like is it okay or safe to use the apple seeds in the cider recipe?
Thanks, Jess. That's a good question. It's something that I learned in school taking toxicology. They talked about the apple seeds, and I think it's just something that like is an interesting fact about apples. They do contain cyanide in them, but they're only you only see toxic effects once you ingest a lot of them. Like it has to be like buckets and buckets full of apple seeds, and they're only the cyanide is only present once the apple seeds are crushed. So when we're making cider, they're intact because we're not really crushing them. Like they're being, I guess, boiled in a sense, but yeah, the point is that we're not crushing them and it's not like a huge quantity of them. So it's fairly safe.
Okay, that's actually really good to know because every once in a while I'll accidentally, eat an apple seed when I'm eating the apple and I'll be like, oh no, how bad is it? But that's actually really good to know. So it's only bad in huge quantities and crushed.
Yeah, you'd have to eat thousands of them for it to be toxic.
Okay, that is very good to know. Whew. And then I guess just like more of a personal question, do you have a favorite type of apple that you use or that you eat?
My favorite apple to eat is Honeycrisp. It's like whenever I go apple picking, it's my favorite apple to pick. Like I typically don't pick other apples because Honeycrisp are like the prize to me. But I mean, that being said, I haven't tried a lot of varieties. Recently we tried the Crimson Crisp, which is like a little less sweet than a Honeycrisp and like a lot crisper and more tart. So that was really fun to experience. But yeah, I would say Honeycrisp.
Yeah, I was there for the Crimson Crisp as well. It was I thought it was even better than the Honey Crisp. I don't know. I maybe I like the little tartness of it. Where was it again that we tried that, Christina?
Oh, yeah, it was Sharon Orchards, and they're still open actually. I think they're open throughout the winter season. And yeah, I think they have a farm store, so we can visit them in the wintertime.
Yeah, okay. Good to know that they're still open. Yeah, that's the only place I've seen Crimson Crisp so far, but yeah, I'm sure they'll be getting pretty popular after a while. Liz actually has a question. Is the price of apples expected to go up in the near future? As one of the only local foods, one would hope not. I agree, Liz. What do you think?
I don't know the answer to that. I feel like Jess, maybe you would have a better idea.
Yeah, I mean,
being the farmer.
I think like the price of all food seems to be going up, and it's yeah, I think that's kind of unfortunate. We'll have to see. I don't know if there will be a difference between like apples straight from the grower. So if you go actually to the farm and go to their market and see if what the price is there, as opposed to maybe imported apples or apples just at the grocery store where they're being sold or bought wholesale. So it's hard to say, right? But I also agree, Liz. I hope not, because it is sort of a local fruit that we can access easily, right? So we'll have to see. Oh, and then Jung actually has a question. Are local apples waxed or not? Ooh. Christina, do you know anything about that? I've heard some. Yeah, I've looked into it a little bit because I worked at an apple orchard for a little bit, and they it was a long time ago when they would actually wax the apples, but I don't believe that's actually a practice that's used, in the past while. So I think that when you get an apple from the grocery store, and sometimes you feel like there's a little bit of a film on there, it's actually just almost like an oxidation process. So that happens naturally, but that's not the type of wax that's been added to it. It's actually a natural process. So what actually preserves the apple is the temperature that it's stored at, and also sort of like the crates and the containers that they're stored in, as opposed to people using wax these days. So I don't think local apples or even imported apples are really waxed these days. Okay, Jane said she had to jump off, no problem. And then I actually had a question about like the best apples for baking. I know you mentioned like I think Macintoshes and the Ida Reds. Like, yeah, do you have a list of best apples for baking, and do you have like a preference for what it is about those apples that make them good for baking as opposed to just eating raw?
So the apples that we like tend to bake with are ones that, I guess it depends. Like if you want something more sweet, like if you want to bake something that's sweet, maybe you don't want to have an apple that's very sweet because you want to balance, tart and sweetness, so it's not overly sweet. You also want to look for an apple that keeps its shape well. So I think it was Granny Smith apples are good for baking because they're tart. So when you add sugar to it, it doesn't like become overly sweet, and also holds its shape well. I think Honey Crisps are supposed to be good for baking as well because they also retain their shape. I guess like when you're baking with Macintoshes, maybe you want to mix other apples in there because they tend to turn mushy after a while. So combining apples is good because you get a mixture of flavor and sweetness, and texture. So it just keeps it a little bit more interesting.
Cool, that is good to know. Those are two good factors to consider. And then I had one last question for you, but I also wanted to ask the folks who are on here, if you guys usually get your apples from the grocery store, or do you go to the farms, and do you do any pick your own? Like, is that a thing that people are doing? Because I'm curious. And if that is a thing you're doing, do you guys have a favorite orchard that you go to, and the favorite apple that you pick from those farms? Because I love going to the farms. I think it's super fun. And I'd love to hear, yeah, just if people have like their favorite farms to go to. I think Christina, you also love going to pick apples, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, have you had a favorite pick your own place?
I've only gone to one, probably because of the apple fritters, to be honest. Every year I look forward to getting the apple fritters, but in past years I've missed out on them, and it's been very devastating having to pay the entry fee and then not get the apple fritters. But it's at Applewood Farm in Stouffville, I believe. Yeah, it's really fun. They have like wagon rides and like really big orchard. They also let you pick pumpkins and squash for free.
Ooh.
Well, for free. It comes with the price of admission.
Okay, got it. Applewood Farms. Cool. Ooh, okay, so we got some answers, I think. Sharon's been getting apples from the grocery store, and Liz as well. Let's see. So, and then Jung was saying from supermarket, they'll want to visit the farm, afraid would need to buy bulk quantity that she can't consume. That's actually a very good point. I think my problem is going to the farms and then just not being able to stop picking because it's so much fun, and then I end up with like a huge bag that I can hardly carry, and then what am I going to do with it? Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any things that you do with like large quantities of apples, Christina?
Um, I feel like apples keep pretty well. Like in the fridge, I keep them in the crisper. So I do. It takes me a while to get through them. Also, I like to give them away or bake with them, just eat them. But yeah, I mean, you do end up with a lot. So I just tend to give them away to friends and family.
That's a great idea. I like that. Just share the love, right?
Hmm.
Actually, in Liz's comment, she had said, she wishes she had energy to pick apples. Hopefully, the Whole Foods apples are truly organic, but a friend of hers says that they really need to be sprayed. So I've heard it is difficult to grow organic apples, but I think I definitely think it's possible. I think one thing that we've been talking about with organic vegetables and fruits is just being open to the idea of ugly fruits, right? Because sometimes organic is all about like making sure there's no pests, making sure there's no disease or damage. But if you grow organically, your stuff like your apples could have, some scabs on it, or just it doesn't look perfect, but it still tastes just as good, and it's still just as, it's fine for eating. So yeah, that's a good point, Liz. For sure. Okay, well, yeah.
I just wanted to say, we received some apples from someone's tree. Do you remember, Jess? It was like hundreds of pounds of apples, and they weren't the prettiest looking apples, but everyone who ate them said that they were delicious. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Um, yeah, and oftentimes maybe they're even taken care of even better, right? Because they're organic and they're natural, and they might taste just as good, if not better. So yeah. Um, yeah, are there any other questions that people have for Christina before we wrap up? I know it's getting close to 2 o'clock. If not, well, I want to say a big thank you to Christina for doing the workshop for us. And yeah, we'll definitely be sending out that follow-up email with the actual recording. I'll try and make sure the audio is good before I send that out to you guys. And then Christina had mentioned a PDF file with information. So I'll get that also sent out so that you guys can actually follow along with the recipes and all of that. Okay. Sharon says, thank you. We'll have to try the cider and chips as something new. So yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Appreciate it, and hope you guys have a good rest of your day. And yeah, try out some of those recipes. All right. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.